Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW. Or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
From the National, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022, from the news section, Bankery, 4 children taken to hospital after Easter Monday crash, by Laura Webster. 2 adults and 4 children had to be taken to hospital after a crash involving 4 vehicles. Police Scotland are appealing for witnesses following the collision on the A93 North Deeside Road near Bankery at about 7:30pm on Easter Monday. The crash involved a white Volkswagen Tiguan, a silver MG, a blue Nissan X-Trail and a grey Land Rover Discovery. It resulted in a 38-year-old woman and 2 children, aged 4 and 6, being taken to Aberdeen Royal Infirmary with serious but not life-threatening injuries. A 31-year-old man and 2 children, aged 1 and 3, were also taken to hospital with minor injuries, Police Scotland said. Meanwhile, 3 men, aged 66, 75 and 76, were treated by emergency services at the scene. Road Policing Sergeant Steve Manson said, "Our thoughts are with those involved and their families as they recover from their injuries." The incident involved a number of vehicles, resulting in the road being closed for 5 hours. "We are appealing for anyone who witnessed the collision or was in the area around the time and may have dashcam footage to contact Police Scotland." And that article is by Laura Webster. From the Glasgow Times, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022, from the politics section, Conservative Glasgow Council hopeful Tariq Parvez called for politicians to be hanged, by Xander Richards, political reporter. The Scottish Tories have been forced to admonish one of their own candidates after they repeatedly called for politicians to be publicly hanged. Tariq Parvez, Conservative candidate for Glasgow's South Side Central Ward, said that lawmakers in Pakistan should be executed and insulted the former wife of the country's ousted Prime Minister, Imran Khan. The Tory hopeful attacked Reham Khan, who had criticised the health record of the party her ex-husband founded. He wrote, "You are a disgrace to women. Language used in your book edited by your son is disgusting. You should apply for a job in Playboy magazine." Elsewhere, he called for public figures in Pakistan to be executed, writing, "Nawaz, Zardari, Diesel and Wali. Khan's son must be hanged in public." He wrote years later, "Corrupt, judges should be hanged along with corrupt politicians. Not General Parvez Musharraf. He's a Pakistani hero." Parvez will face no further action after he assured the party he would not make such statements in the future. He said, "I apologise for making such awful remarks. This was a serious mistake and I am very sorry. It will be deleted immediately and I promise it will not happen again." A Scottish Conservative spokesperson said, "These comments are completely out of order. We have warned the candidate about making these kinds of statements, which are unacceptable. He has apologised and given assurances it will not happen again, which we have accepted." And that article is by Xander Richards. From the National, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022, from the politics section, Jacob Rees-Mogg sparks fury with demand to civil servants, by Angus Cochrane. Jacob Rees-Mogg is feeling the wrath of union leaders after demanding the rapid return of civil servants to their Whitehall workplaces. In a letter to Cabinet Ministers, the Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency Minister said they needed to issue a clear message to their departments that with the end of COVID restrictions in England, officials should be back in the office. He argued that the ending working from home would bring the benefits of face-to-face, collaborative working, as well as delivering wider benefits for the economy. No MP or member of government, with the exception of the Prime Minister and Chancellor, have a shorter commute to Downing Street than Rees-Mogg. His substantial home is within 100 metres of Parliament. Most civil servants can't even afford to buy in the furthest zones of London, journalist Vincent McAvaney tweeted. In 2018, it was reported the Conservative MP bought a £5 million, 5-storey mansion close to Parliament in Downing Street. Rees-Mogg's call was branded vindictive by Dave Penman, the General Secretary of the FDA representing senior civil servants, who said the Tory government was out of step with practice in the private sector. With up to 3/4 of staff still reportedly working from home, the Efficiency Minister accompanied his letter with a league table showing how many staff in each government department were attending the office on an average day. Now that we are learning to live with COVID and have lifted all legal restrictions in England, we must continue to accelerate the return of civil servants to office buildings to realise the benefits of face-to-face, collaborative working and the wider benefits for the economy. To deliver this, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Steve Barclay, and I urge to issue a clear message to civil servants in your department to ensure a rapid return to the office. A Whitehall source quoted by the Telegraph said there was a minority of hard-working officials who were in the office all the time, while a silent majority of people aren't pulling their weight. The comments infuriated Penman, who accused the ministers of behaving like Luddites, while the private sector embraced the benefits of flexible working. There is no rationale for this. Ministers can't point to productivity losses, which is why it's always anonymous sources making the insulting accusations, he said. Ministers' obsession with ending flexible working and micromanaging the civil service increasingly just looks vindictive. Jacob Rees-Mogg is the Minister for Government Efficiency, yet that isn't even a consideration in his correspondence with ministers. The private sector has embraced hybrid working, recognising the efficiency that it delivers and competitive edge it gives to employers in a tight labour market. Meanwhile, the Luddites in the Cabinet insist on micromanaging the civil service, which will only deter good people from joining whilst simultaneously demotivating those already there. However, Rees-Mogg was backed by the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis, who said it was a very good thing for people to be back in the workplace. There's something different about that face-to-face interaction, he told Times Radio. I think anybody who's been missing that recognises that, but there's also the issue, particularly for new staff and younger staff, about being able to become part of a team and get to know their colleagues. Actually, that doesn't work in a virtual world. You need to be in an office to be able to learn from others, to work with others, and get to know each other. So I think people being back in the workplace is a very good thing. A government spokesman said, Ministers have been clear that the department should make maximum use of office space and progress is being monitored. And that was an article by Angus Cochrane. From the National, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022, from the news section, Recruitment Boost for Scots NHS Workforce by Jane MacLeod. Scotland's hospitals have been given a recruitment boost as hundreds of additional healthcare support staff and overseas nurses are recruited to help the NHS through unprecedented challenges. More than 1,000 support staff will be working a variety of roles in acute hospitals and community health teams. The drive for more support staff, backed by £15 million, was launched by Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf last October to help the country through the pandemic. Under a separate £4.5 million initiative, 191 nurses from countries including India and the Philippines have been offered employment, with some already working in hospitals and healthcare settings across Scotland. Agreements are in place with recruitment agencies to hire a further 203 nurses. The figure is likely to increase significantly over the coming months as health boards take advantage of the new infrastructure for employing qualified international staff, the Scottish Government has said. Yousaf said, "The pandemic has been the biggest shocker the NHS has faced in its 73-year existence. To help with winter pressures and pressure brought on by the current COVID wave, we are expanding and investing in our NHS workforce. Our hard-working and compassionate health and social care staff have been on the front line of patient care throughout the pandemic, and I am incredibly grateful to them all. In October, we set ambitious targets to boost the number of healthcare support staff and step up international nurse recruitment. I am delighted with the success of the recruitment campaigns and seeing the new staff already providing frontline patient care. Around 155,000 whole-time equivalent staff were working for the service at the end of December, according to the NHS workforce statistics." Yousaf added, "Scotland has the best paid NHS staff in the UK and record workforce levels, with more than 155,000 whole-time equivalent staff now working in the service. We are determined to continue this progress as we recover from the pandemic. Our national workforce strategy for health and social care commits to understanding how we can achieve a more sustainable, skilled workforce which makes carers in health and social care, at all levels, more attractive. The Scottish Government has provided £1 million for the development of infrastructure for an ethical international recruitment system, which is in line with the Scottish Code of Practice for Health and Social Care Personnel, which brings individuals to Scotland with valuable skills and experiences." And that article was by Jane MacLeod. From the National, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022, from the Politics section, exclusive, Tory candidate Judy Lockhart-Hunter made anti-refugee Facebook comments. By Steph Braun. A Tory council candidate who launched an anti-refugee petition has made further controversial comments about people settling in the UK, it has emerged. It has been discovered Judy Lockhart-Hunter, who is running for office in the North Berwick coastal ward of East Lothian, said, back in 2016, that refugees moving into the seaside town was making it less appealing. In a separate incident, she commented on a story about a Syrian refugee who was working at a bakery in East Lothian, saying she couldn't understand how he has managed to provide such an eloquent quote about how much he loves Scotland. It comes after the National found a Change.org petition she launched in 2015, which said Syrian refugees should not be welcomed into the UK. Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross defended her and said she now had completely different opinions on the issue. Lockhart-Hunter has once again apologised for her comments on Facebook after previously saying sorry for the poll she started. The Tories have said she has been spoken to about her unacceptable remarks. Anne McLaughlin, SNP spokesperson on immigration, said it sounded like Lockhart-Hunter was missing the school playground. She said, "If living near people from very different backgrounds to herself doesn't appeal to Judy, that's sad and she's missing out. But by expressing those feelings, she's making it less appealing to those refugees who have no choice in where they end up. Losing everything, including family members, knowing you might never see your homeland again, must be heartbreaking and frightening, and if this Tory candidate feels unable to welcome them, the least you could do is keep those thoughts to yourself. One of the best ways to integrate into your new community is to learn the language, but it must be hard given the reasons for having to do that. So to poke fun at someone clearly doing their best to build a new life, and successfully so, tells us she is missing her school playground and really doesn't have the maturity for elected politics." Lockhart-Hunter's comment on the story about the Syrian baker, which was shared online by SNP North Berwick candidate Liz Allen, said, "Obviously great the guy and his family are making a success of their move. I cannot understand though how he managed to provide such an eloquent quote re how much he loves Scotland, yet, later in the article, he apparently speaks so little English the baker colleagues have to communicate with thumbs up. Anyway, hopefully he can learn the language and set up his own bakery." On a separate post, Lockhart-Hunter commented, "I would like to say one day I will return to the town I grew up in, North Berwick, and all of my family live, however. With the new influx of people, The school standards are dropping, local amenities need revamped to deal with the increased demand, and apparently refugees are moving into the town centre, so it's sounding less appealing by the minute, which is a shame, as if this became a widespread view, house prices would drop and people have worked hard for their homes. Her petition, intended for former Prime Minister David Cameron, displayed a large image of a Union flag with the slogan "Veterans before Migrants" and a bird stating how refugees would be far better placed going to another Islamic country where they can fit in easier. Apologising for the Facebook comments, Lockhart Hunter said, "As I said when asked recently, this does not reflect my views today. I regret making these comments a number of years ago. They were poorly worded and inappropriate, and I apologise to anyone who may be offended." A Scottish Conservative spokesperson said, "We have spoken to the candidate about making unacceptable remarks." And that article was an exclusive by Steph Braun from The National, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022. From the news section, War in Ukraine, Russia launches full-scale assault on Eastern Front. By Angus Cochrane, multimedia journalist. Russia has launched a full-scale offensive in eastern Ukraine as the Kremlin aims to take control of the country's industrial heartland. Ukraine's General Staff announced Vladimir Putin's troops are focusing their efforts on taking full control of the Donbass region in a new phase of the war. The occupiers made an attempt to break through our defences along nearly the entire front line, the General Staff said in a statement on Tuesday. The stepped-up assaults began on Monday along a front of more than 300 miles, focused on the Donbass regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, with the Russian forces trying to advance in several sections, including from the neighbouring Kharkiv region. In southern Donetsk, the General Staff said the Russian military has continued to blockade and shell the strategic port city of Mariupol and fire missiles at other cities. On Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a video address that a significant part of the entire Russian army is now concentrated in this offensive. Moscow-based separatists have been fighting Ukrainian forces for 8 years in mostly Russian-speaking Donbass and have declared 2 independent republics that have been recognised by Russia. Russia has declared the capture of the Donbass to be its main goal in the war since its attempt to seize the capital, Kiev, failed. "No matter how many Russian troops are driven there, we will fight," Zelensky vowed. "We will defend ourselves." Troops battled in the streets of Crimea on Monday before Russia was able to gain control of the city, according to Serhiy Haidai, Luhansk regional military administrator. Haidai said that before advancing, Russian forces just started levelling everything to the ground. He said his forces retreated to regroup and keep fighting. The breakthrough at Crimea brings the Russians closer to the city of Slovyansk, which is seen as a key target in the Russian offensive. Slovyansk was seized by pro-Russian fighters in 2014, only to be retaken by Ukrainian forces months later following intense fighting. Russian troops have already seized the city of Izium, which sits north of Slovyansk, and they're poised to push towards the city from the north and the east. Slovyansk lies just north of another key city, Kramatorsk, where an earlier Russian attack on a train station killed more than 50 people. On Monday morning, Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security Council, told Ukrainian media that the defensive line had not been broken elsewhere. "Fortunately, our military is holding out," Danilov said. In Mariupol, Denis Prokopyenko, commander of the Azov regiment of the Ukrainian National Guard, said in a video message that Russia had begun dropping bunker buster bombs on the Azov-style steel plant where the regiment was holding out. The sprawling plant contains a warren of tunnels where both fighters and civilians are sheltering. It is believed to be the last major pocket of resistance in the shattered city. Russia has Mariupol surrounded and has been fighting a bloody battle to seize it. If Russia takes Mariupol, it would free up troops for use elsewhere in the Donbass, deprive Ukraine of a vital port, and complete a land bridge between Russia and the Crimean Peninsula, seized from Ukraine in 2014. In western Ukraine, near the Polish border, at least 7 people were reported killed on Monday in missile strikes in Lviv. Lviv has been a haven for civilians fleeing the fighting elsewhere, and, to the Kremlin's increasing anger, the city has also become a major gateway for NATO-supplied weapons. The attack hit 3 military infrastructure facilities and an auto shop, according to the region's governor, Maxim Kozytsky. A hotel shelling Ukrainians who had fled the fighting in other parts of the country was also badly damaged, Lviv Mayor Andriy Sadjevich said. The nightmare of war has caught up with us even in Lviv, said Lyudmila Turchak, who fled with 2 children from Kharkiv in the east. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, was hit by shelling on Monday that killed at least 3 people, according to Associated Press journalists on the scene. Shelling can be heard overnight and into Tuesday morning in the major eastern city, which has been struck numerous times but remains firmly in Ukrainian control. Moscow said its missiles struck military targets in eastern and central Ukraine, including ammunition depots, command headquarters, and groups and troops of vehicles. It reported that its artillery hit hundreds of Ukrainian targets and that warplanes conducted 108 strikes on troops and military equipment. The claims could not be independently verified. General Richard Danat, a former head of the British Army, told Sky News that Russia was leading a softening up campaign ahead of the Donbass offensive. A senior US defence official, speaking in condition of anonymity to discuss the Pentagon's assessments of the war, said there are now 76 Russian combat units, known as battalion tactical groups, in eastern and southern Ukraine, up from 65 last week. That could translate to around 50,000 to 60,000 troops, based on what the Pentagon said at the start of the war was a typical unit strength of 700 to 800 soldiers. Meanwhile, it was reported the UK government will soon send armoured missile launchers to Ukraine. The Ministry of Defence demonstrated the Stormer High Velocity Missile, HVM, launcher for Ukrainians at Salisbury Plain 2 weeks ago, according to The Sun, with the paper adding the 13-ton vehicles can be flown to the war on C-17 transport planes in days. The Stormer is manufactured by BAE Systems, needs just 3 people to operate it, and uses Starstreak missiles, which can be used to take down low-flying aircraft. And that article is by Angus Cochrane. From the National, Tuesday the 19th of April 2022, from the news section, William Clark, body found in search for missing Skye teenager, by Xander Richards. A body has been found in the search for a missing teenager from the Isle of Skye. William Clark, from Ardvassar on the island's southernmost peninsula, was reported missing on Sunday evening. The BBC reported that he was a 5th year pupil at Portree High School. Though formal identification is yet to take place, the family has been informed and have asked for privacy. Officers said there did not seem to be any suspicious circumstances. Coast Guard, Mountain Rescue, Lifeboat and Police Scotland helicopter teams were involved in the search. Police Scotland Inspector Isla Campbell said, "Our condolences are with William's family and friends. His family have requested that their privacy be respected at this difficult time. I would like to thank all agencies and members of the public who assisted in the search for William." And that article was by Xander Richards.
The National Politics on Wednesday the 20th of April. Prime Minister set to face key vote after apology fails to win over opposition MPs. A front-page article written by Laura Webster. Boris Johnson will face a vote on whether he misled Parliament after Partygate tomorrow after apologising to MPs for the saga. Yesterday evening, Mr Johnson offered a wholehearted apology to the House of Commons after being issued with a fixed penalty notice for attending a birthday gathering in Downing Street in breach of his own COVID laws. Now, following a cross-party effort from the SNP, Labour and Lib Dems, Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has given the go-ahead for MPs to debate and vote on whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament in previous statements about rule-breaking in Number 10, during which he argued COVID guidance had been followed at all times. Labour are understood to be wording the motion to make the vote about whether to refer Mr Johnson to the Committee of Privileges, which examines issues relating to contempt of Parliament. The committee has the power to summon reports and documents. It means that MPs could ask to see the full version of Sue Gray's inquiry into lockdown gatherings and any photographic evidence that exists. Tomorrow's debate and vote will also likely see Tory MPs whipped to support the Prime Minister, leaving the Scottish Tories, who often trades on a perception of distance from Mr Johnson, with a choice of either visibly endorsing his actions or otherwise. Mr Johnson is not expected to be in the UK for the debate, as he's scheduled to make a trip to India tomorrow. During his short statement to the House yesterday evening, the Prime Minister said sorry for breaking the rules, but insisted he did not do so intentionally. Let me also say, not by way of mitigation or excuse, but purely because it explains my previous words in this House, that it did not occur to me, then or subsequently, that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules, he told MPs. I repeat that was my mistake, and I apologise for it unreservedly. Shortly after, Mr Johnson invoked the tragedy of the coronavirus and the war in Ukraine in an effort to present himself as too important to be removed from office. Shouts of "resign" could be heard in the Commons. SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford said the parties the Prime Minister had denied happening were the very same parties that the police have now fined the Prime Minister for attending. He said the public knew the Prime Minister was only apologising for one reason, which is because he's been caught. After months of denials, his excuses have finally run out of road, and so must his time in office, Mr Blackford said. The Prime Minister has broken the very laws he wrote. To try and argue that he did not know he had broken his own laws would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. The MP went on, not just a lawbreaker, a serial offender. If he has any decency, any dignity, he would not just apologise, he would resign. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer also offered his condemnation of Mr Johnson, telling the House that the public don't believe a word the Prime Minister says. He referenced Cabinet Minister Brandon Lewis earlier, drawing a comparison between Mr Johnson's Partygate fine and a speeding ticket. Mr Starmer said no one has ever broken down in tears because they couldn't drive faster than 20 miles an hour outside a school. Don't insult the public with this nonsense. In Mr Starmer's attack on Mr Johnson's apology, Scottish Tory chief Douglas Ross also found himself caught in the crossfire. Mr Ross was singled out by the Labour leader as he called out the Prime Minister for ruining the careers of those close to him. Good ministers forced to walk away from public service, the Chancellor's career up in flames, and the leader of the Scottish Conservatives rendered pathetic, he said, referring to Mr Ross withdrawing his call for Mr Johnson to resign last month and continued defence of the Prime Minister. Despite anger on the opposition benches following Mr Johnson's apology, there was little upset from Tory backbenchers. Just one Conservative MP, Mark Harper, called for the Prime Minister's resignation. The former Tory Chief Whip, who has been a prominent critic of Mr Johnson and served in Theresa May's government, said that the Tory leader was no longer worthy to lead the government. He sent a letter to Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, which regulates when the Tory party can hold a no-confidence vote in its leader. In his letter, he accused Mr Johnson of breaking the ministerial code and of being no longer able to deliver the principled leadership required to take our country forward. At least 17 Tory MPs have called for Mr Johnson to go. At the last count, there were around 20 letters sent to the 1922 committee, but 54 are needed to trigger a no-confidence vote. A front-page article written by Laura Webster. The National Politics on Wednesday the 20th of April. Boris Johnson's claim about BBC's Vladimir Putin coverage rubbished. An article written by Angus Cochran, multimedia journalist. A BBC presenter has dismissed as a smokescreen Boris Johnson's attack on the corporation over its coverage of the Tory administration. The Prime Minister claimed both the broadcaster and senior members of the clergy had been less vociferous in their condemnation of Vladimir Putin than they had about plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. His comments at a private meeting with Tories in Parliament on Tuesday night came as he sought to shift attention away from his apology for breaking coronavirus rules by attending his lockdown-busting birthday party in the Cabinet Room in June 2020. Sources close to the Prime Minister said he told Tory MPs in a private meeting it was a good policy, despite some criticism on the BBC and from senior members of the clergy, who he said had been less vociferous in their condemnation on Easter Sunday of Mr Putin than they were on our policy of illegal immigrants. BBC presenter Seema Kotecha, the UK editor of Newsnight, fired back at the Prime Minister on social media. She pointed out that the Prime Minister has not put his life at risk, as BBC journalists such as Clive Myrie, Lise Doucette and Jeremy Bowen have while reporting in Ukraine. Ms Kotecha added, "It's a smokescreen, isn't it?" On BBC Radio 4's Today, on Wednesday, presenter Justin Webb challenged Business Minister Paul Scully about his boss's comments. Mr Scully said he had not seen a lot of coverage on the BBC about the plan to send some asylum seekers who arrive in the UK on a one-way trip to Rwanda for processing, because I was away over the weekend. Mr Webb said he apparently made the point to Conservative MPs that the BBC and the Archbishop of Canterbury were not focusing enough on Vladimir Putin. I just wonder, can you come up with an occasion when Boris Johnson has put his life on the line for the truth, as BBC correspondents Jeremy Bowen has, as Lise Doucette has, as Clive Myrie has? Mr Johnson faces the prospect of a Commons vote on Thursday on whether a parliamentary committee should investigate claims he lied to the House. Mr Scully said, "It's not something I can particularly comment on." Mr Webb suggested it was a smokescreen, and Mr Johnson was attacking people he really ought not to be attacking. Mr Scully said, "I don't remember the comment particularly. I'm just trying to explain the context that I believe he may have been trying to make." He acknowledged that there had been some excellent coverage from the BBC and elsewhere on the ground in Ukraine. "I'm not attacking the BBC, I'm here joining you," he told Today. Meanwhile, the Church of England's head of news, John Bingham, said if the reports of Mr Johnson's behind-closed-doors comments were true, it was a disgraceful slur. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, had publicly condemned Mr Putin's invasion of Ukraine as an act of great evil. An article written by Angus Cochrane. The National News on Wednesday the 20th of April. Countdown begins as Mod heads to a new city. An article written by Beth Whitelaw. The online entry system for this year's Royal National Mod is now open, and Common Gaelach has announced. Competitors wishing to take part in the event, which is taking place between October the 14th and 22nd in Perth, have until 10 p.m. on July the 15th to submit their entries. The major musical and cultural event will return with a full suite of in-person competitions, alongside the retention of some online competitions and the launch of new categories. It will be the first time the City of Perth has hosted the 130-year-old event celebrating Gaelic language and culture since 2004. On the back of delivering online competitions for the previous two Royal National Mods amid the coronavirus pandemic, some online competitions will remain, including solo singing, instrumental and choral categories for juniors and seniors. The online element proved popular for those wishing to take part in the event from afar and will allow competitors to enter, record and upload their performances through the digital system. The online competitions and performances will be showcased via the Royal National Mod's social media channels as part of the event in October. This year will also see the addition of the Battle of the Bands competition to the junior competition syllabus. This will provide an opportunity for young people to perform live on stage, with the winning bands receiving a recording session experience with We Studio in Stornoway. On top of competitions including singing, recital, instrumental, drama and Highland dancing, a new TikTok contest will be launched, as well as an event aimed at encouraging more natural conversation among young people. The senior competition syllabus will also welcome a new Accompanies Choirs competition aimed at harmony singing groups consisting of between 5 and 10 singers, and a solo singing contest, the Calmac competition, open to adult learners. The senior piping events will now feature Premier A and B grade competitions. Both grades will have a pibroch, a march, strathspey and reel event. Marina Mackay, Mod Officer at Uncommon Gaelach, said, "It's a joy to announce the entries for the Royal National Mod 2022 in Perth are now open. It will be a fantastic moment to welcome hundreds of competitors back to perform in person this year, and we have no doubt the calibre of entries will be incredible once again." An article written by Beth Whitelaw. The National News on Wednesday the 20th of April. Energy Boss's £1,000 bill call to government. An article written by Craig Meehan. As many as 4 in 10 people in Britain could fall into fuel poverty in October, energy bosses warned as they called for more support from the Treasury for poorer households. Scottish Power's Chief Executive, Keith Anderson, said the UK government should take £1,000 off the bill of poorest people in the country in October. The government or bill payers could then pay this off over 10 years, he suggested. I think the problem's got to the size and scale that it requires something significant of that nature, where those people who are deemed to be in fuel poverty or vulnerable need something of the size and scale that puts their bills back to where it used to be before the gas crisis, he told MPs on the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee. Mr Anderson called that Stage 1, which should be followed up with a social tariff that gives poorer households discounted energy. This should replace the current price cap, he said. He added it's perverse that customers with prepayment meters, who are likely to be more vulnerable, pay more for their energy than those who pay by direct debit. E.ON UK Chief Executive Michael Lewis said his company would support a social tariff, but called it a long-term measure. He said that between 30% and 40% of people in Britain might go into fuel poverty from October, when the price cap is likely to rise significantly again. EDF estimates that its most vulnerable tenth of customers will go from paying £1 in every £12 they have on energy bills to £1 in every £6. Centrica boss Chris O'Shea said prepayment customers will start seeing a real increase in October. Those who are paying their energy bill by direct debit will see prices go up this summer to build up credit for the winter, but prepayment customers will not do that, so we'll see an even bigger rise in October. 2 months ago, the government announced a £200 rebate to be applied to energy bills in October, which will need to be paid back over the next few years. Mr Lewis called for the £200 to be increased if bills go up significantly again in October, and for the repayment period to be extended if needed. An article written by Craig Meehan. The National Politics on Wednesday the 20th of April. Holyrood hears damning evidence calling for greyhound racing ban. An article written by Abby Garton-Crosby, multimedia political reporter. Campaigners calling for a ban on greyhound racing have told a Holyrood committee horror stories of dogs being doped with cocaine and revealed staggering injury and death statistics on Scottish tracks. Jill Doherty, who logged the petition in 2019, and Jacqueline Brown, Secretary of Scotland Against Greyhound Exploitation, told MSPs that over 3 years, that's in 2017 to 2020, at the now closed Shawfield Greyhound Stadium in Rutherglen, 15 dogs died and 197 were injured. The campaigners said that the figures show that existing animal welfare legislation in Scotland is not having an impact because it can't change the danger of the track itself. Despite the greyhound commitment introduced by the official regulatory body Greyhound Board of Great Britain in 2018 to improve the welfare of greyhounds and reduce the number of injuries, a doubling of injuries was reported in 2020 compared to 2018 at Shawfield Stadium. Greyhound racing takes place on an oval track with injuries to dogs caused by collision going round corners with other dogs, boards on the outside and rails on the inside. The petition was first lodged in October 2019 and gathered 13,159 signatures, the fifth most signed Scottish parliamentary petition in history, which Doherty said speaks to the level of support for this important issue. After being delayed by the pandemic, MSPs on the Rural Affairs, Islands and Natural Environment Committee heard evidence behind the ban call on Wednesday. Pre-pandemic, Scotland had 2 greyhound racing tracks. Shawfield, which was regulated, is now closed, and Thornton Stadium in Kirkcaldy in Fife, which the petitioners said is completely unregulated. The Flapper track, where dogs don't need to be licensed, does not have a vet on site to check for injuries or to drug test the dogs. Ms Doherty told MSPs that when drug testing was done in Shawfield, in 2% of the races, there were 13 positive drug tests in 2018 to 2019 alone, and 5 of those were for cocaine. She said, "If that's the evidence we have at a track doing only 2% of testing, it's our belief that the rate of doping will be much higher at Thornton and going completely unchecked." Ms Doherty set out the problem, stating that if a greyhound tested positive for cocaine, this wouldn't come to light for 3 to 5 months afterwards. She explained, "It's published at the very back of an online journal buried deep within the BWBF website, so we scour these journals every week when they come out, and we learned that 5 months ago this trainer drugged this dog." This has not been reported to the SSPCA or Police Scotland. When we see it in the journals, we report it, and they're not aware of these issues. 5 months on, the dog is no longer there. The trainer has moved to a different track. There's no evidence to collect anymore. The BWBF doesn't work with the authorities to make sure prosecutions are made. It's done to influence the outcome of the race and make more money. That's what this industry comes down to: money and a bit of entertainment on a Saturday night. Ms Doherty added that death and injury statistics are not broken down by track, making it difficult to pinpoint which ones are the most dangerous. She added, "There's a purposeful effort to obstruct our ability to scrutinise the industry from the outside." The petitioners also told how racing greyhounds are mostly kept in sheds, and when rescued can find it difficult to settle into a new home, which is heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. Fellow petitioner Ms Brown added, "The worst cases I've seen are the dogs with nothing behind their eyes. They're lost. There's nothing present. They have such deep psychological trauma that it takes years to bring them back to being a dog, and some don't have that long. I've seen dogs up to the age of 9 and 10 come out of the kennels. They have seldom seen the light of day. They don't have time to learn to be a pet." Scottish Greens MSP Mark Ruskell joined the petitioners to support their call for a ban and pointed out that the SSPCA had changed their policy and supported the ban after trying to enforce welfare standards since the Animal Welfare Act was introduced in 2006. He told the committee, "I genuinely think that this is an industry beyond reform." The inherent risk petitioners outlined: dogs going around the track at 40 miles an hour, the risk of collisions between dogs and dogs on the track. It doesn't just raise serious welfare questions of how we treat and deal with the injuries that arise from greyhound racing, but also major ethical considerations about why we're putting dogs into that stadium in the first place, knowing full well that they're going to have an increased risk of injury and death. It's a major ethical consideration as well as a welfare one. The SSPCA, One Kind, League Against Cruel Sport Scotland and the All-Party Parliamentary Dog Advisory Welfare Group have all called for an end to greyhound racing. Speaking after the committee session, Mr Ruskell said, "The growing evidence is clear that even on licensed tracks, greyhounds are at risk of serious harm, injury and even death. That's why the SSPCA is joining the rising calls for a ban. In Scotland, greyhound racing is on its last legs. With only one licensed track left, it's time to act decisively to protect the welfare of greyhounds and finally put an end to it." An article written by Abby Garton-Crosby. The National News on Wednesday the 20th of April. McGarry gave Women for Independence staff the runaround on funds, court told. An article written by Gregor Young, journalist. A woman has said she was repeatedly lied to by former MP Natalie McGarry about the financial running of a pro-Scottish independence group they were both part of. Kathleen Caskey was employed by Women for Independence, or WFI, in the lead-up to the Scottish independence referendum in 2014 and continued to work in the running of the organisation on a voluntary basis afterwards. The 56-year-old told the jury she was being given the runaround by the former MP, who was treasurer for the group at the time, over some of WFI's financial matters. Ms Caskey was called to give evidence at the trial of Ms McGarry, who's 40, who's accused of misappropriating more than £25,000 from 2 campaign groups, including the WFI. Ms McGarry, who represented Glasgow East for the SNP, allegedly embezzled £21,000 while treasurer for the WFI between the 26th of April 2013 and the 30th of November 2015. It's also alleged that she transferred cash made from fundraising events into her own personal accounts and failed to send donations intended for Perth and Kinross Food Bank and the charity Positive Prisons. A second charge states Ms McGarry took £4,661 between the 9th of April 2014 and the 10th of August 2015, when she was Treasurer, Secretary and Convener of Glasgow Regional Association of the SNP. Ms McGarry denies the charges. At a hearing at Glasgow Sheriff Court yesterday, Ms Caskey, who said she's known Ms McGarry since she was a child, was asked about several WFI debts. The court saw an email from Stirling Council chasing payment for venue hire for an event WFI hosted in 2015. The email from a representative at the council addressed to Ms Caskey read, "I need to speak to you about an invoice that remains outstanding for £326.40. Looking at the email, the witness said, "This was really embarrassing. I was lied to. I was told cheques had been sent. I was thrown into panic. I became really cross. Natalie was telling me rubbish that she had sent cheques and none of it was true." Prosecutor Alistair Mitchell said, "You'd been told by Natalie that this event had been paid for?" Ms Caskey replied, "Yes, several times. I was being given the runaround and I was really angry." The court was shown a financial report prepared by Ms McGarry ahead of the WFI's AGM in 2015, which Ms Caskey described as embarrassing. Mr Mitchell asked her to explain why it was embarrassing, to which she replied, "It just wasn't up to scratch. It wasn't what you would expect any intelligent person to write. It was just weirdness. It certainly wasn't the format I was expecting." Alan MacLeod, defending, read out a written statement from Ms Caskey to Police Scotland, where she described WFI as being run in a chaotic fashion by Ms McGarry and former WFI member Shona McAlpine. The witness agreed, telling the court it was chaotic as decisions were not being made properly through the committee, adding there was a great need for greater order. The jury was then shown an email from former member and co-founder of WFI, Carolyn Leckie, in which she said there was too much pressure on Shona and particularly Natalie. Ms Caskey told the court it became clear that Natalie was not capable of managing financial matters. As to why Ms McGarry remained in charge of WFI finances until 2015, Ms Caskey said, "No one could get anything off her. No one could get passwords, receipts. It was like we were being held at ransom." The trial before Sheriff Tom Hughes continues. An article written by Gregor Young. The National News on Wednesday the 20th of April. New phase of war reached as Russia ups frontline assault. An article written by Jane MacLeod. Russia has ratcheted up its battle for control of Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland, intensifying assaults on cities and towns in what officials on both sides described as a new phase of the war. After a Russian push to capital city Kiev failed, the Kremlin declared that its main goal was the capture of the eastern Donbass region. That would give President Vladimir Putin a vital piece of Ukraine and a badly needed victory to present to the Russian people, amid mounting casualties and the economic hardship caused by the West sanctions. In recent weeks, Russian forces that withdrew from Kiev have regrouped in preparation for an all-out offensive in Donbass, where Moscow-based separatists have been fighting Ukrainian forces for 8 years. Ukraine's military said early yesterday that a new phase of war has begun when the occupiers made an attempt to break through our defences along nearly the entire front line. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that another phase of this operation is starting now. Defence Ministry spokesman Major General Igor Konashenkov said Russian missiles destroyed 13 Ukrainian troop and weapons locations, while the Air Force struck 60 other military facilities and Russian artillery hit 1,260 Ukrainian military facilities and 1,214 troop concentrations between Monday and yesterday. The United States believes Russian forces are continuing to set the conditions for what they believe will be an eventual success by putting in more forces, more enablers, and more command and control capability for operations yet to come, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said. Russia said it struck several areas with missiles, including the city of Kharkiv in the northeast. At least 4 people were killed and 3 wounded in the attack. The attack yesterday came as residents tried to maintain a sense of normality, with municipal workers planting spring flowers. An explosion also rocked the eastern city of Kramatorsk, killing at least 1 person and injuring 3. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for a 4-day humanitarian pause in fighting in Ukraine, starting tomorrow, to coincide with Orthodox Easter observances. Easter should be a moment to unite around saving lives and ending suffering in Ukraine, he said. Russia seized control of one town in Donbass, Kremina, on Monday. This takes the Russians a step closer to their apparent goal of encircling Ukrainian troops by advancing on them from the north and the south. Mariupol is key to the eastern campaign, and shelling continued there as Moscow issued an ultimatum yesterday for troops to surrender, saying those who do will keep their lives. Securing Mariupol would free Russian troops up to move elsewhere in Donbass, deprive Ukraine of a vital port, and complete a land bridge between Russia and Crimea. Denis Prokopenko, commander of the regiment that's guarding the last known Ukrainian pocket of resistance in Mariupol, said that Russia had begun dropping bunker-buster bombs on the Azovstal steel plant, where the regiment is holding out. On Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that a significant part of the entire Russian army is now concentrated on the battle for Donbass. No matter how many Russian troops are driven there, we will fight, he vowed. An article written by Jane MacLeod. The National Politics on Wednesday the 20th of April. First Minister hosts top-level meetings for IndyRef planning. An article written by Abby Garton-Crosby. Nicola Sturgeon has hosted a series of top-level meetings as part of preparations for a second independence referendum, reports say. Officials confirmed the First Minister held 3 meetings between November 2021 and early February 2022, but no minutes of the discussions were made available, according to the Scottish Sun. The First Minister, Deputy First Minister John Swinney and Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson held talks with civil servants and advisers where they discussed the approach to the development and delivery of new independence white papers. They also discussed which topics to include in the document. Officials have reportedly refused to release any other details, suggesting it would impact the formulation of government policy. The newspaper reports that the First Minister held top-level meetings on November the 24th, 2021 and January the 14th and February the 3rd this year. Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross has criticised the revelations by claiming the First Minister has taken her eye off the ball. He added, "She's not focused on the day job, and that's why we see scandal after scandal over ferries, drug deaths, school standards, A&E waiting times and just about everything else." But a Scottish Government spokesperson said people in Scotland voted last May to elect the Scottish Parliament, which has a clear majority in favour of holding an independence referendum. In line with that democratic mandate, the programme for government stated that the Scottish Government would start work on a detailed prospectus for an independent Scotland. If the people of Scotland choose independence, the full range of powers of an independent country would allow Scotland to put in place a transformational recovery from the pandemic, one which will lead to a fairer and more sustainable and prosperous nation. The First Minister has consistently said that she intends for a second independence referendum to be held in 2023. The white paper, which the above meetings reportedly discussed, should be published before the next vote, but a date is yet to be set. There's also been no hard date confirmed as to when the referendum bill, the legislation that would allow a vote to go ahead, will be laid before Holyrood. There could also be issues ahead if the legislation is referred to the Supreme Court, if UK law officers think it may lie outside of the Parliament's legislative competence. A similar issue occurred last year after the Parliament voted to incorporate the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into Scots law. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has also repeatedly rejected the idea of allowing a second independence vote to go ahead, along with the possibility of granting a Section 30 order. And we previously told how House of Commons researchers have concluded that the row over a second independence referendum could end up in court, as it's not clear whether or not MPs can block a second vote. It comes after it was revealed last week that one senior civil servant and 14 other officials are working on the independence blueprint. An article written by Abby Garton-Crosby. The National News on Wednesday the 20th of April. Second World War veterans' medals will not be returned to his family. An exclusive article written by Ninian Wilson. The medals of a Second World War veteran will not be returned to his family after an offensive decision informing them they are the property of the museum. Scott McBay has told of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders Regimental Museum's offensive decision to keep his grandfather's 6 medals that he won while serving with the regiment, despite taking them off the main display. The medals hold significant sentimental value to Mr. McBay's father, as William McBay, the recipient of the medals, died when he was only 4 years old. Since Mr. McBay's grandmother donated them in 1966, along with those won by her brother, The family has taken great pride and sentimental value from visiting Stirling Castle, where the medals are kept. 5 of the 6 medals were won over the course of the Second World War. The decision followed a £4 million refurbishment to the museum, which was delayed by the pandemic. With the years passing without the McBays getting to see the heirlooms that connected them to their family history, they were excited to see the medals back in pride of place. However, they were met with disappointment as the medals had been taken off display in the main museum. In a letter explaining the decision, they were told the display had been misused by visitors and that a minority had been trying to stand on the handles to break them, the paintwork being scratched, and people shaking the drawers and violently pushing the drawers in and out, trying to dislodge the medals within and potentially damage them. In response, Mr. McBay requested that the medals be returned to the family. Mr. McBay's complaint was eventually turned over to Colonel Miller, who said that the medals were the property of the museum and that they were not at liberty to return them to the family members. However, he made clear that the family could view the medals if they gave advance notice of their visit. Speaking to the National, Mr. McBay said that the decision not to return the medals to his family was the most insulting aspect of the ordeal. He said, "I appreciate that my gran donated them to the museum, but I've got a letter saying, 'Give us these, we'll put them on display and this will help your husband and brother live on.' That was the basis that the family donated them." Mr. McBay said that his father wasn't happy when he heard of the decision and that it was not what his grandmother would have wanted. The museum has been contacted for comment. An exclusive article written by Ninian Wilson. The National Politics on Wednesday the 20th of April. SNP to pursue 10,000-seat arena in Edinburgh if they win city's local elections. An article written by Craig Meehan, multimedia journalist. The SNP has promised to pursue plans for a new 10,000-seat arena in Edinburgh if the party wins power in the council elections. The party's local election manifesto vowed to address long-standing gaps in the capital's cultural infrastructure and included plans to revamp the Ross Bandstand in Princes Street Gardens. The SNP said it wanted people in Edinburgh to be able to see their favourite artists in their own city. The plan would seek to reverse the decline of the historic Ross Bandstand. Reform has previously been floated as an idea, with a design proposed to replace the structure, winning an international award. The project later ran into trouble over concerns about its potential impact on existing gardens and how it would be operated. The SNP's manifesto states that it will work with the Fringe and other festival organisers to expand Edinburgh's cultural offerings outside the Old Town in an effort to spread the cultural benefits to more communities in the capital. The SNP manifesto states, "We're proud of Edinburgh's status as the world's festival city and all the benefits that brings. We have the highest participation in the arts of almost any community in the world. We're proud of the diversity and multiculturalism our vibrant city contains. We'll work with our world-famous summer festivals to ensure they emerge from the pandemic more sustainable and as vibrant as ever, while supporting and enabling the Fringe and other festivals out from the Old Town, spreading cultural benefits to more communities. Edinburgh has diverse and dynamic communities in all corners, not just in the city centre. We'll promote and support community-led festivals and cultural events throughout the city by ring-fencing funding and support for grassroots events. We'll engage with the creative and hospitality sectors to identify gaps in the types and sizes of venues our city currently has to offer, including assessing demand for a new 10,000 capacity venue so that Edinburgh residents will be able to see their favourite bands and shows in their own city. Working with community groups will facilitate a plan by local people and for local people for the Ross Bandstand in Princes Street Gardens, publicly owned and operated for public good. Scottish Labour's local election manifesto pledged to introduce a presumption against using public spaces and parks for commercial use where there is not clear public support. Meanwhile, the Scottish Greens have vowed to bring in better regulations over such use of landmark spaces, such as Princes Street Gardens, the Meadows and Inverleith Park. An article written by Craig Meehan.
The National, April 21. East Dunbartonshire Council elections. Is another coalition on the cards? Report by Steph Braun. A more diverse council and a greater focus on improving sustainable travel are what the SNP group say could come about in East Dunbartonshire if voters back them next month. The area may have returned 2 female MSPs in Rona Mackay and Marie McNair last year, while Amy Callaghan secured the East Dunbartonshire seat in the House of Commons in 2019. But for the past 5 years, the council has been male-dominated, with just 6 women representing communities compared to 16 men. SNP Deputy Group Leader Gillian Rennick said that could all change if the people of Milngavie, Bearsden, Bishopbriggs, Lenzie and Kirkintilloch give their backing to the party on May 5. The group have put out a diverse clan of 8 candidates across the council's 7 wards, including women, some younger hopefuls and some who live with disabilities. Councillor Rennick, who herself is hoping to retain her seat in Lenzie and Kirkintilloch South, said it would be a positive step forward to have some different progressive voices in the chamber. She told The National, "We feel we are far more diverse this time round. A couple of our candidates have disabilities, and some identify differently in terms of LGBTQ, and it just makes the group a bit more interesting, I think. I have been a councillor for 15 years, and at some meetings I'm the only woman there. We have had a strong female leader in the past, and at one point we had a female provost, and if you think about it, all our MPs and MSPs recently have all been women, and yet we have a very male-dominated council. We have got 2 or 3 younger people standing this time round. We'd just love to get some different points of view in there. Sometimes you walk into the council chamber and it feels like things have already been decided, and it's sometimes a bit of a debate for show. I would much rather we could have younger female voices in the chamber. It needs to be a lot more collegiate, because it has felt too tribal at times in the past 5 years, and that's not what people get into council politics for. It has been a politically turbulent and at times emotional term for elected members in the area, with a change in administration and the tragic death of a provost. The SNP group started out controlling the council when they returned the most seats in 2017, but by the end of that year the Tories and Liberal Democrats had joined together to form their own coalition and took over the reins. The sudden death of Conservative Provost Alan Brown also shook up the chamber in a different way last year, with Lib Dem Gary Hughes taking the gold chain in his place. Councillor Rennick admitted at times it had been a struggle to get agreement across the board on certain proposals, such as securing a new Lenzie Academy building. And with East Dunbartonshire being a major commuter area for Glasgow, one idea which has been discussed of late involves developing a cycle link between Lenzie and Bishopbriggs to make it easier for cyclists to get to and from the city. Councillor Rennick said her group have tried to push the initiative forward, but have so far struggled to get enough support. If they can get more councillors, she's hopeful their influence will bring more greener travel to a region full of nature. She added, "We have plugged at sustainable travel recently. There is a possibility to connect Lenzie up with Bishopbriggs. We've got rail links and there are some bus links, but we wanted to do a cycle link that would run along the Glasgow to Edinburgh railway line. Cyclists are some of the strongest lobbyists that we've had, and they have a real issue. People have been cycling more during the pandemic, and to be able to make it a bit more sustainable, they would need a route so they could get from Lenzie safely into Glasgow and the Lindsay to Bishopbriggs bit is missing. We have tried the last couple of budgets to get something included in the capital budget, but it's just not been accepted, so that's definitely something we're looking at. If we had more councillors, that may help. It's all about having the votes. I've always said I love a good idea for East Dunbartonshire, no matter who brings it up, but we've had a difficult time trying to get that outlook in the other direction. For example, Lindsay Academy is the biggest school in the area that hasn't had a new building. Beauclair Academy is getting a rebuild, and it's only in the last year we've managed to get the council admin to agree to doing a feasibility study for Lindsay. It would be difficult to build it on the site it's on, because there have been so many houses built in Lindsay, which is why we need a new school, so it's just where to put it. We're looking at somewhere that might include Lindsay Library, which has been at risk for a few years. No group is aiming for an overall majority across the 22 seats up for grabs at the election, but it's looking likely a coalition would probably be formed between two parties. All signs would suggest the Tories will be up for working with the Lib Dems again, and the SNP have said they are also open to negotiations to work with other groups, most likely Labour. The Greens are also vying for first seats on the council, and given it's the first election since they formed a partnership with the SNP at Holyrood, all eyes are on how they fare. Councillor Rennick was the first to admit that while East Dunbartonshire is so often seen as a leafy, well-to-do district, it is not without its problems, and parties need to work together for the good of the area. She said, East Dunbartonshire is one of these places people think is very affluent, and everything is great, and there are no issues. And we do, of course, have areas of real luxury, but we do also have areas where there is real poverty as well. We are one of two feeder areas for Glasgow. East Dunbartonshire and East Renfrewshire feed people into the city centre for jobs and college. There have been some efforts to try and keep people in jobs in East Dunbartonshire, but the council is by far the biggest employer. I think that's good for council services, but I think more work could be done to create more jobs in the area. I think there are lots of things we could work together on to make East Dunbartonshire a better place. We are aiming to get all 8 of our candidates elected, and that would make us a very strong group, but we would be interested in looking at a coalition with someone. We are open to negotiation, but Labour is the most obvious group to partner with, I think. It would be good if we could get a couple of Greens in. The candidate for this ward, Lindsay and Kirkintilloch South, Carolyn Scrimgeour, is very strong. Scott Ferguson is also so well known in Bearsden South as well. He really plugs away there, and it would be interesting to see if he could upset the apple cart there. Report by Steph Braun. The National, April 21. Douglas Ross given terminal decline warning by former senior Tory MSP. Report by Laura Webster. A former Scottish Tory frontbencher has offered proof of just how out of touch the party is, according to the SNP president. Writing in The Herald, Adam Tompkins offered a serious warning to Douglas Ross, advising him that the party is in terminal decline due to his support of Boris Johnson. The former Glasgow MSP and shadow cabinet member from 2016 to 2020 branded the Scottish Tories Ross's forlorn troops, who have reduced themselves in defence of the Prime Minister's law-breaking. On Tuesday, Johnson issued an apology to the House of Commons after it emerged he had received a fixed penalty notice for a gathering held in Downing Street in 2020 in breach of COVID rules. It was one of a number of gatherings that Johnson was confirmed to have attended while COVID rules were in place, and speculation has grown that further fines may be issued by the Met Police in the coming days and weeks. In January, when Johnson admitted to attending one lockdown-breaching gathering after the Partygate saga exploded, Ross called for the Prime Minister's resignation. Public fury grew as it was confirmed that police were investigating 12 gatherings held across Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown, and the Murray MP said Johnson could not continue in his role. Ross told the media, "I do not want to be in this position. I am in the position now where I don't think he can continue as leader of the Conservatives." But days before the Scottish Tory conference in March, Ross withdrew his letter to the 1922 committee, demanding Johnson step down, saying Ukraine was more important. Ross said in the U-turn, "It is essential that we all fully support what the UK government is doing. In light of Russia's appalling actions, the government and the Prime Minister need our backing, and they have mine and the whole Scottish Conservative Party." The MP was heavily criticised for the move, with the Lib Dems saying Ross had the backbone of a jellyfish, and Ian Blackford calling his change of mind utterly humiliating. After fines were issued to Johnson and his Chancellor, on top of the more than 50 issued by police for Westminster parties, Ross continued to offer his support for the Prime Minister. Johnson is already a deeply unpopular figure in Scotland, with his approval ratings north of the border consistently below -60. With the local elections coming up, voters across the country may well have Partygate and Johnson in mind when casting their votes. In a column, Tompkins expressed his concerns over Ross's risible defence of Johnson and said his party is now in the sorry position of defending the Prime Minister, a fool and a clown who must be shown the door. Douglas Ross and his forlorn troops have now reduced themselves and made their former position of principle look not only empty but risible, by insisting that the Prime Minister is now somehow fit for office and that being fined by the police makes no difference, he wrote in the newspaper. I expect that the popular verdict on this pantomime of a performance will be every bit as withering as it deserves to be. He added that Scottish Labour will just need to sit still as they overtake the Tories, putting them in second place and making them the main opposition to the SNP. Tompkins went on, "The Scottish Conservatives are in terminal decline again, and this time it is their own fault." SNP President Michael Russell said the exchange would make Tompkins less popular with his former Tory colleagues than the Archbishop of Canterbury, but pointed out that he is right in what he says. He never seemed very happy when on the Tory Holyrood front bench, having to take up a position on things like Brexit, with which he clearly disagreed, he told The National. Now that he is free to speak, he is at last saying what he really believes, and which many others know to be true, namely that Ross is a pathetic excuse for a leader, that Johnson is a serial liar who is utterly unfit to be Prime Minister, and that in denying those things the Tories are out of touch, not just with much of their own support, but with the vast majority of decent Scots. I profoundly disagree with Adam's political philosophy, but on this occasion I think his words are both honest and courageous. However, I doubt very much that they will be heeded. Meanwhile, SNP MSP Karen Adams said Tompkins was absolutely correct for a change. Douglas Ross's humiliating U-turn, followed by his spineless defence of his lying boss, has stripped the Scottish Tory leader of any remnant of integrity, the Banffshire and Buchan Coast MSP told The National. And, of course, the entire Tory MSP group at Holyrood backed Douglas Ross in his demand that Boris Johnson quit, so they will be furious he has marched them up a hill and now left them all looking ridiculous. The Tories' weasel words that this isn't the time to pursue lying and law-breaking in the highest office in the land insults the intelligence. Douglas Ross will find out at the council elections on May 5 exactly what the people of Scotland think of a Scottish Tory party that defends the indefensible behaviour of Boris Johnson. Former MSP Tompkins has not been the only Scottish Tory speaking out against Johnson, despite the official party line. Last week, MSP for the South Scotland region, Brian Whittle, went against his leader to say the Tory chief should leave his role. He said, in a statement, Vladimir Putin's brutal assault in Ukraine has rightly been the focus of the UK government in recent weeks. However, the seriousness of the actions of Boris Johnson and others in Downing Street during lockdown has not diminished. When news of the lockdown parties first emerged, I said that the Prime Minister should hold himself accountable and resign. My view on that has not changed. Here in Scotland, Boris Johnson's actions have made it far too easy for the SNP and the Greens to conceal behind a mask of outrage their own failures in government, from the crisis in the NHS to the hundreds of millions wasted on botched ferry deals. Leadership without accountability is no leadership at all. Boris Johnson should step down and allow a leadership election to take place by the end of the summer, so we can put this issue to rest and move on. Report by Laura Webster. The National, April 21. Pinocchio Prime Minister told to pack his bags and go. Report by Xander Richards. Boris Johnson deserves to have the label Pinocchio Prime Minister stick to him for the rest of his time in office, whether it is deemed unparliamentary or not, the SNP's Richard Thompson has said. Thompson, the MP for Gordon, was admonished by the Speaker on Wednesday after he told Prime Minister's questions that Johnson's fundamental political problem at the moment isn't about parties or fixed penalty notices or cake. It is about the lack of trust, integrity and credibility at the heart of government which he now personifies. When is the Prime Minister going to realise that people do not want to hear any more glib, half-hearted non-apologies, or hear him witter on about getting on with the job? They just want this Pinocchio Prime Minister to pack his bags and go. The Prime Minister had told the House of Commons he bitterly regrets breaking the law and receiving a fixed penalty notice, an FPN, from police who are investigating further allegations of coronavirus lockdown breaches in Number 10. As Johnson began to answer Thompson's question, Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle interrupted and called on the SNP MP to withdraw the remark and be more moderate in his language. Thompson said he would withdraw it when he packs his bags and goes. The Gordon MP later told The National, Pinocchio has been used a few times before in Westminster, according to Hansard, but clearly the Speaker took the view that it was not an acceptable label to attach to the Prime Minister in the context of the debate. MPs should not routinely describe each other as being dishonest, but frankly, there's a growing gulf between what people say about the Prime Minister's conduct and what we're able to say about him inside Parliament. Whether it is deemed parliamentary language or not, I think it's a description that people will recognise for this Prime Minister, and it is one which thoroughly deserves to stick to him for the remainder of his time in office. MPs were scheduled to vote on Thursday to decide if Johnson should be investigated further by a parliamentary committee on whether he misled Parliament over his assurances COVID rules were followed. Labour's Chris Bryant said he will recuse himself as chair of the Committee of Privileges if the motion passes, which would allow the body to investigate if Johnson misled Parliament. However, the Tory government has ordered its MPs to vote for a motion which will put off any vote on an investigation into misleading Parliament until both Sue Gray and the Met Police have concluded their own probes into Partygate. The move came after some Tory backbenchers reportedly threatened to vote with Labour to allow a probe into the Prime Minister's lies about his criminal behaviour. Plaid Cymru's Westminster leader, Liz Saville-Roberts, also asked Johnson whether he will support a lying in politics bill. She said Plaid Cymru have been calling for 15 years for a law to ban politicians from being woefully misleading. New polling by Compassion in Politics shows that 73% of people support such a law. Will the Prime Minister support a lying in politics bill? Johnson replied, "It is well known that the rules of the House demand that we tell the truth in this House, and that's what we try to do." When asked if he will commit to making public every FPN he receives, Johnson said, "I have been transparent with the House and will be." Labour have tabled a motion calling for the Prime Minister to be referred to the Commons Privileges Committee over allegations he was untruthful when he assured the Commons that coronavirus regulations were followed in Downing Street during the pandemic. The party is calling on Conservative MPs to back its call for a Privileges Committee probe during a vote on Thursday, threatening to make those who support Johnson the subject of campaign advertising. Without Tory votes, the motion, which was published yesterday, looks certain to fail, despite being backed by figures from 6 other opposition parties. Speaking to reporters after PMQs, Labour leader Keir Starmer's spokesperson said, "This is a clear example where Conservative MPs should vote with their conscience. Denying the reference to the Privileges Committee is not going to sway the public that there was not widespread rule-breaking in Number 10. It is simply going to confirm the impression that Conservative MPs believe there is one rule for the government and another rule for everyone else." Report by Xander Richards. The National, April 21. Rwanda plans are far-right pandering, says Alison Thulis. Report by Hamish Morrison. The UK government has been accused of pandering to the far right with its plans to send refugees to Rwanda, amid concerns ministers cannot guarantee the safety of those sent there. The new scheme, which will see an unspecified number of refugees who land in Britain after making the perilous crossing across the English Channel, has raised concerns about the safety of migrants sent to the Central African country. SNP MP Alison Thulis recently made a fact-finding trip to Napier Barracks, a notorious encampment for asylum seekers in Folkestone, Kent, which she described as dehumanising. The visit has sparked concerns the conditions for asylum seekers in Rwanda will be as poor or worse, Thulis said. She told The National, "My recent visit to Napier Barracks allowed me to see firsthand how profoundly unsuitable and dehumanizing such sites are for asylum seekers. The dilapidated former barracks used by the government to house asylum seekers are inadequate, lacking in facilities, and people there struggle to get access to lawyers and adequate health care. It is frightening to imagine what a facility located in another country thousands of miles away from scrutiny will be like." And she accused the government of engaging in a dog whistle move to appease their supporters on the far right. She added, "During the worst cost of living crisis to date, the government should be focusing on allowing all people to have enough money to feed themselves, rather than pandering to the dog whistle politics of the far right." Thulis asked Home Secretary Priti Patel how the facilities would be scrutinised and noted concerns from Human Rights Watch of arbitrary detention, ill treatment and torture in official and unofficial detention facilities. Her concerns were dismissed as being covered in the agreement between the UK and Rwanda, which Patel accused the MP of having not read in detail. The memo of understanding between the two countries notes asylum seekers will be held in accommodation that has been provided at all times in accordance with Rwandan laws and regulations. But there is no mention of whether the UK will be given the ability to scrutinise accommodation used to house those sent. Thulis added, "There are serious questions of transparency and how the Home Office can ever be held to account for what happens to the individuals it sends to Rwanda. It is time for the government to get a grip and stop with these tactics to divert the attention away from the chaos within this government. Thousands of human lives are at risk here. They must be protected." Report by Hamish Morrison.
And that was this week's The National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.